Hi, I'm here with a review of Small Game Hunting at the local Cowards Gun Club for Canada Reads 2020. So I'm going to be separating this review kind of in two. The first half of this review is going to be a more traditional review, and the second half will be talking about the book in context of Canada Reads. So let's get started. This book was written by Megan Gale Coles, and it will be defended by Alana Fender. This novel follows a cast of characters all centered around this restaurant, and they all deal with a slew of their own personal issues. You know, from Iris struggling in an emotionally manipulative relationship to Olive, who seems to just wander through life struggling to find her place, to Cal, Damien, and Roger trying to define masculinity. I think this book is best described as taking millennials and the issues they care about, such as the Me Too movement, dealing with boomers, toxic masculinity, working retail, and amping it up to 500%, and punching the reader in the face repeatedly with how horrible the world can be. So I'm going to talk about the three things I look for most in a good book, and that is writing, character development, and themes. So in regards to the writing, honestly, if this book had been 200 pages, 150 pages shorter, the writing would have been excellent. However, as it is, the book felt too long and repetitive. I felt like the plot was stretched out over too many pages. And I really liked her writing initially, but Cole's insistence that every sentence carries weight and, punches the reader with insight grew tiresome, and it would have definitely worked in a shorter book. In regards to characters, another thing that felt too much was the amount of characters. Some of the characters actually felt very similar to one another, and this wasn't helped by having similar plot things happen to them throughout the story. I think that the base is there for a great novel, but that it suffered from a lack of editing. I did like how, say, George stood out as a foil for comparison against Iris and Olive. And I did really like getting worked up reading about Major David, who's that stereotypical hateful boomer character. There's two main themes that I'd like to discuss here. The first is class. So this is a working class novel. We do follow people who are very privileged and have very different lives from the people that are struggling to get by. And it greatly showed how so many people who work in very necessary but low paid jobs are affected in all aspects of their life, from their housing to their self-worth, because they can barely afford to live. They're living paycheck to paycheck. And this is a huge issue in Canada, and it drives me nuts when politicians talk about how important the middle class is, when honestly, I think the middle class could disappear tomorrow and the world will still keep being run by the working class. All the people doing the grunt work to keep things going. Another huge theme in this novel is sexual assault. So this book doesn't shy away from sharing horrible things in detail. And that needs to be done. It shouldn't be glossed over, I think. And it's interesting how we get both the perspective of the girl being assaulted and the boy doing the assault. Because it will cause people to confront their own personal beliefs on the issue when you get both sides. I also want to address the fact that people are more than their sex lives, however, and she seems to kind of objectify women as well. There's this one character whose entire being was built upon being sexually assaulted and being promiscuous to the exclusion of, other things. And I'm not condemning promiscuity, but that was just like her defining features were those two things. And even the other woman who was featured was barely featured without the mentioning of her sexual relationship. And, women were barely ever mentioned without a connection to sex in some way, whether that sex was consensual or not. And I began questioning whether Coles was aware that she was doing this, like if this was a conscious thing that she was doing, or if she didn't understand what she was doing. One of the standout features of this novel is that it gives a voice to working class millennial women. When we hear about women's issues, we often hear from celebrities or upper class women. Working class people face a lot of barriers when it comes to getting their voices heard, and we need more authors willing to expose this overlooked and underappreciated class. And here we have a Canadian author doing that, and I really appreciate that. One of the negative features of this book is the lack of hope or anything or anyone good to cling on to. So this book is suffocating in its length and its brutality, and I think I would have been more positively inclined towards it if there had been at least one decent character, you know, someone to root for, or a glimmer of hope that maybe things will be alright, or that maybe justice will be done, just something good. There's nothing good in the book in regards to moral goodness. And I know it's not always realistic to expect that, and I do actually like unhappy endings, but an ending can only really be unhappy if you want the characters to be happy to begin with, and I didn't want any of the characters to be happy. They were all, you know, not good people. Again, with the length and the constant repetition and this lack of hope, that there was really no point to read it past a certain point, and I kept hoping, there was a bit of hope because I kept hoping that something good would happen, that something different would happen, but it didn't. So I really wished I actually had DNF'd this at like 150 pages from the end or so, just because it got the point across in that many pages. So I'm going to share a quote from the book, and because I really like the working class nature of this book, it's in regards to that. People in the service industry are like that. Pseudo adults trapped in everlasting adolescence, just muddling along whilst hating any authentic adult for embarrassing them by doing stuff and owning things. And I think that addresses a lot of issues with millennials and, you know, feeling stuck and not feeling like adults because our jobs don't allow us to purchase a home or purchase a car or, you know, go on elaborate vacations. You know, these things aren't a realistic thing for a lot of people working low-paid jobs. So now I'm going to talk about this book in relation to Canada Reads. Does this book fit within the theme of this year's debates? And the theme for this year is a book to bring Canada into focus. However much I love that this book features underrepresented voices in Canada, I do think that it lacks focus. Every sentence felt separate from the one before it and from the one after it because Coles tried to force so much into each one. As well, the plethora of point of views and the plethora of characters felt more overwhelming and resulted in a lack of focus for me. Do I think this is a book that all Canadians can or should read? And I want to separate those can and should, because there may be barriers that prevent someone from reading it, but there is my personal opinion that people should be reading this. I think the topics in this book need to be talked or more relevant here, read about, but unfortunately think that the average reader will not want to put in the effort to finish this book because of its length, its brutality, and its lack of hope. So what do I think of the person defending this book? Alana Fender is a fellow YouTuber. She makes more traditional YouTube content, although she does put an LGBT plus spin on them. And she also addresses issues of sexuality and mental health in a more serious manner as well, which I think is great. So she's able to reel in viewers with like the traditional content, and then hopefully some of those viewers will then watch her more serious discussions on sexuality and mental health. Where in the competition do I think this book will be placed? I'm interested to see how the men will react to this, as there's no real positive portrayals of men. I also think that its relentless negativity will put some of the other debaters off, and they'll kind of vote it off in the middle because there's a lot of good issues to talk about, but I think that it will not win Canada Reads this year. So that's my review of Small Game Hunting at the Local Coward Gun Club by Megan Coles. Let me know what you thought of this book and where do you think it will place in the Canada Reads debates this year, and thank you for watching.